ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel looked like something from a movie that night. Huge crystal chandeliers glowed above hundreds of rich guests dressed in shining suits and expensive gowns. Soft music floated through the air, while waiters moved carefully between tables carrying trays filled with drinks and desserts. Cameras flashed near the entrance as famous business owners, online influencers, and wealthy families arrived one after another. Everything had to be perfect. The annual Sinclair Charity Gala was the biggest event the hotel hosted every year, and people from all over the city waited months for an invitation. For the guests, it was a night of luxury and attention. For the hotel workers, it was a night filled with pressure. Among the staff working quietly in the crowded ballroom was a young waiter named Adrian. He moved carefully through the room, keeping his eyes low while balancing glasses on a silver tray. His uniform was perfectly clean, though slightly worn at the sleeves. He looked calm on the outside, but inside he was exhausted. He had already been working double shifts all week. Still, Adrian never complained. At 23 years old, he had already learned that life rarely became easier by complaining about it. Most guests didn't even notice him as he passed their tables. To them, he was simply another worker blending into the background. But if anyone looked closely, they would have seen something different in his eyes. There was a quiet sadness there, the kind that comes from years of disappointment. Adrian had grown up without a real home. After losing his parents in an accident when he was very young, he spent most of his childhood moving between foster homes and shelters. Some places were kind, others were cold and careless. He learned early how to stay quiet, avoid trouble, and never expect too much from people. But there was one thing that always gave him peace: music. When Adrian was 11 years old, an old caretaker at one foster home discovered him pressing random keys on a dusty piano in the corner of a church basement. Instead of yelling at him for touching it, she smiled and showed him a few simple notes. That moment changed everything. From then on, Adrian became obsessed with the piano. Whenever life felt unbearable, he played. Whenever he felt lonely, he played. Music became the one place where he didn't feel invisible. But dreams cost money. As he grew older, reality slowly crushed those dreams. Piano lessons were expensive. Music schools were impossible to afford. By 18, Adrian had no choice but to work full-time just to survive. Still, he never completely gave up. Every night after work, he visited a small community center across town where an old piano sat near the back wall. Some keys barely worked, and the sound was rough, but Adrian played anyway. Sometimes for hours. Nobody there knew how talented he truly was. And Adrian preferred it that way. That evening at the gala, things were unusually chaotic behind the scenes. Managers rushed through hallways whispering nervously while hotel workers tried to stay organized. "The pianist still isn't here?" one employee whispered. Another shook his head. "Traffic accident. He may not make it." Inside the ballroom, guests were beginning to notice the delay in entertainment. Murmurs spread between tables. Near the center of the room stood a glossy black grand piano waiting under a spotlight. And standing nearby was the hotel owner's daughter. Her name was Celeste Sinclair. At 25 years old, Celeste was already famous online for her luxury lifestyle videos and extravagant personality. Millions followed her social media accounts where she regularly posted expensive vacations, designer fashion, and glamorous parties. She loved attention and knew exactly how to control a room whenever cameras were nearby. But many hotel employees feared her. Celeste had a habit of embarrassing workers for entertainment. To her wealthy friends, it seemed funny. To the staff, it felt humiliating. That night, she wore a sparkling silver dress while laughing loudly with a group gathered near the piano. Several guests held phones in their hands, recording clips for social media. Then Celeste suddenly noticed Adrian walking past with a tray of drinks. "You there?" she called loudly. Adrian immediately stopped. "Yes, miss." Several nearby guests turned to watch. Celeste tilted her head slightly. "Do you know how to play piano?" Adrian froze for a second. He could already feel people staring at him. "A little," he answered carefully. One of Celeste's friends laughed. "A waiter who plays piano? This should be good." Celeste smiled slowly, clearly amused. "Well," she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "our pianist is missing and the guests are getting bored." More people began paying attention now. Adrian's stomach tightened. He already knew where this was going. Celeste stepped closer to the piano with dramatic confidence before turning back toward him. Then she said the sentence that would change everything. "If you can perform something impressive on this piano," she announced with a mocking smile, "I'll adopt you myself." Laughter exploded around the room. Several guests nearly spilled their drinks laughing. Others immediately pulled out phones, excited to capture another embarrassing moment for the internet. Adrian stood completely still. His face burned with humiliation. He had experienced moments like this before. Rich people often treated workers like objects instead of human beings. But tonight felt worse because so many people were watching. Celeste crossed her arms confidently. "What's wrong?" she teased. "Too scared." More laughter followed. One guest whispered loudly, "This is going to be painful." Another said, "At least we'll finally get some entertainment." Adrian looked around the ballroom. Nobody seemed uncomfortable except the hotel staff. Several workers lowered their eyes awkwardly, clearly feeling sorry for him but too afraid to speak. For a moment, Adrian considered walking away. That would have been the easier choice. But then his eyes slowly moved toward the piano. The black polished surface reflected the ballroom lights beautifully. Even from a distance, he could almost feel the familiar comfort the instrument always gave him. And suddenly, something inside him shifted. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was exhaustion from years of being underestimated. Or maybe he was simply tired of staying silent. Without saying another word, Adrian carefully placed his tray onto a nearby table. The room grew quieter. Then he slowly removed his white serving gloves. Celeste's smile faded slightly. She expected him to refuse or embarrass himself immediately. But Adrian calmly walked toward the piano without hesitation. Whispers spread through the ballroom. "Wait, is he actually doing it? This should be interesting. Someone record this." Adrian sat down at the piano bench slowly. For a brief moment, his hands rested quietly above the keys. The ballroom remained almost completely silent now. Even people across the room turned their attention toward him. Adrian took one slow breath. Then he began to play. The first notes floated softly through the ballroom like a whisper. Instantly, the atmosphere changed. The laughter disappeared. Guests who had been smirking only seconds earlier suddenly looked confused. Adrian's fingers moved across the keys with smooth confidence, each note flowing naturally into the next. The sound was beautiful, not decent, not surprising, beautiful. A deep emotional melody filled the room, carrying so much feeling that conversations stopped almost immediately. Waiters paused beside tables. Cameras lowered slowly. Even the guests recording for entertainment forgot to keep filming. Nobody expected this. Adrian continued playing without looking up once. As the melody grew stronger, his entire expression changed. The nervous waiter was gone. In his place sat someone completely different. Calm, focused, and deeply connected to every note. It was as if the piano was the only place where he truly belonged. One older guest near the front blinked in shock. "That's impossible," he whispered quietly. Another guest leaned closer toward the stage area. "He plays like a professional." Meanwhile, Celeste stood frozen beside the piano. For the first time all night, she had nothing to say. The poor waiter she mocked in front of everyone wasn't struggling. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't embarrassing himself. He was controlling the entire room without speaking a single word. And with every note Adrian played, the humiliation Celeste planned for him slowly turned back toward her instead. The music continued flowing through the ballroom like a wave that nobody expected to hit them. Every note Adrian played seemed to pull people deeper into silence. The rich guests who had been laughing minutes earlier now stood completely still, staring toward the piano with disbelief on their faces. The entire mood of the evening had changed. Even the hotel staff looked shocked. Some workers slowly gathered near the ballroom entrance just to listen. A few whispered quietly to each other, unable to believe the quiet waiter they worked beside every day could play like this. Adrian barely noticed any of them. His attention stayed fixed on the piano keys. For the first time in a very long while, he forgot where he was. He forgot the expensive ballroom, the mocking laughter, and the eyes watching him from every direction. All he felt was the music. His fingers moved naturally across the keys, soft during emotional moments and powerful during the louder parts of the song. The melody carried something deeper than skill, carried pain, loneliness, hope, everything he had buried inside himself for years. That was why the room couldn't look away. People weren't just hearing music. They were feeling his story without him saying a single word. Near the front table, an older man wearing glasses slowly lowered his drink onto the table. "I've attended concerts all over the world," he whispered to the woman beside him. "But this feels different." She nodded quietly, unable to take her eyes off Adrian. Meanwhile, Celeste stood frozen only a few feet away from the piano. At first, she tried forcing a smile, pretending she still found the situation amusing. But with every passing second, the confidence on her face disappeared more and more. This wasn't going the way she planned. Not even close. Her friends noticed it too. One of them leaned closer and whispered awkwardly, "Did you know he could actually play like this?" Celeste didn't answer, because the truth was simple. She never cared enough to wonder. To her, Adrian had only been another invisible worker carrying trays around the hotel. She never imagined someone like him could walk into a room full of wealthy people and completely control it with music alone. Phones continued recording across the ballroom, but now for a completely different reason. Guests who originally wanted to capture a humiliating moment were suddenly filming something unforgettable instead. One woman quietly uploaded part of the performance online with the caption, "Waiter gets mocked by rich guests, then shocks entire ballroom with piano performance." Within minutes, the clip began spreading across social media. But inside the ballroom, nobody knew that yet. Adrian reached the middle section of the song, and the energy shifted again. The music became stronger now, more emotional, almost overwhelming. Several guests looked visibly moved. A young hotel worker near the doorway wiped tears from her eyes quickly before anyone noticed. Another whispered softly, "He plays like someone who's lived through a lot," and that was true. Every difficult year of Adrian's life seemed hidden inside the music somehow. The loneliness of growing up without family. The feeling of always being unwanted. The endless struggle just to survive. All of it poured into the piano. Then something unexpected happened. One of the piano keys suddenly stuck. It made a sharp sound that briefly interrupted the melody. A few guests gasped quietly, but Adrian didn't panic. Without stopping, he smoothly adjusted his hands and continued playing as if nothing happened. In fact, the mistake somehow made the performance feel even more real and emotional. The audience became even more impressed, because now they understood this wasn't rehearsed for attention. This was pure talent. Near the back of the ballroom, the hotel owner himself had finally arrived after handling business calls upstairs. His name was Victor Sinclair. Tall, calm, and sharply dressed, Victor rarely showed strong emotions in public. Employees respected him because, unlike many wealthy owners, he usually treated workers fairly. As he entered the ballroom, he immediately noticed the unusual silence. Then he heard the piano. Victor stopped walking. His eyes slowly moved toward the stage area where Adrian sat playing under the chandelier lights. "What's happening?" he quietly asked a manager nearby. The nervous manager explained the situation in a low voice, clearly embarrassed by how everything started. Victor listened carefully while watching Adrian perform. And the longer he listened, the more serious his expression became. Because Victor understood music. Years ago, before becoming successful, he had spent part of his childhood living in poverty too. His late mother used to play piano in small restaurants just to earn enough money for food. Hearing Adrian now brought back memories he hadn't thought about in years. Meanwhile, Adrian reached the final part of the performance. The ballroom held its breath. His fingers moved faster now, but every note stayed clean and beautiful. The emotion in the music became almost impossible to ignore. Several guests leaned forward in their seats, completely captivated. Even the workers behind the ballroom doors forgot about their tasks. Nobody wanted the song to end. Then finally, Adrian played the last note. Silence filled the room instantly. No movement. No whispers. For a few long seconds, the entire ballroom stayed frozen. Adrian slowly lifted his hands from the piano keys. He looked down quietly, almost expecting people to laugh again. Instead, the room exploded into applause. The sound was deafening. Guests rose from their chairs one after another until nearly the entire ballroom stood clapping. Some people cheered loudly, while others simply stared at Adrian with pure shock on their faces. Several guests who mocked him earlier now looked deeply embarrassed. One man shook his head slowly and muttered, "I can't believe we laughed at him." Another said quietly, "That was one of the best performances I've ever heard." The standing ovation continued longer than anyone expected. Adrian looked completely overwhelmed. He wasn't used to attention like this. In fact, part of him wanted to leave immediately. But before he could stand up from the piano bench, Victor Sinclair began walking toward him through the crowd. The applause slowly softened as people noticed the hotel owner approaching. Victor stopped beside the piano and looked directly at Adrian for several seconds. Then he spoke calmly. "What's your name?" "Adrian, sir." Victor nodded slightly. "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 2 months." "And where did you learn to play like that?" Adrian hesitated. "A little at church when I was younger," he answered quietly. "Mostly I practiced on my own." Several nearby guests looked shocked again after hearing that. Self-taught? It seemed impossible. Victor studied him carefully. "You never told anyone here you could play?" Adrian gave a small shrug. "Nobody asked." The answer hit harder than expected. Even some guests nearby looked uncomfortable hearing it. Because it was true. Nobody ever cared enough to ask the waiter about his dreams, talents, or life. To most of them, he simply blended into the background. Victor glanced briefly towards Celeste. Her face had gone pale. For the first time all night, she looked nervous instead of confident. Victor already understood enough without hearing every detail. His daughter had clearly tried to embarrass an employee in front of guests. And instead, she accidentally revealed extraordinary talent hidden inside someone she considered unimportant. Victor turned back toward Adrian. "Would you come to my office after the event ends?" he asked respectfully. Adrian looked surprised. "Me? Yes." The room buzzed quietly with curiosity. Why would the billionaire owner personally invite a waiter to his office? Celeste immediately stepped forward. "Dad, seriously? It was just a piano performance." Victor's expression hardened slightly. "No," he replied calmly. "It was much more than that." The room fell quiet again. Celeste crossed her arms awkwardly but stayed silent. Deep down, she already knew something had changed tonight. Not only for Adrian, for her too. As Victor walked away, guests immediately surrounded the piano area, asking Adrian questions all at once. "That was incredible. Are you a professional musician? Do you perform anywhere else? Do you have social media?" Adrian looked overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Only an hour earlier, many of these same people barely noticed he existed. Now they treated him completely differently. Felt strange. Unreal even. Across the ballroom, Celeste quietly watched everything unfold. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar pressing heavily in her chest. Shame. Not because Adrian embarrassed her, but because she suddenly realized how cruel she had been without even thinking about it. And somehow, the person she publicly humiliated had shown more grace and dignity in one evening than she had shown in years. By the time the charity gala finally ended, the ballroom looked completely different from earlier that evening. The loud laughter and careless conversations were gone. Guests now stood in small groups quietly talking about Adrian's performance instead. Some were still replaying videos on their phones while others searched online trying to learn more about him. But nobody could find anything. No interviews, no social media fame, no music videos. Just a quiet waiter who somehow played piano like someone born for the stage. Meanwhile, Adrian stood alone near the employee hallway, changing back into his work jacket. His hands still felt slightly shaky from everything that happened. He wasn't used to attention. Honestly, the entire night felt unreal. One of the older hotel workers approached him carefully. "You did good tonight," the man said with a small smile. Adrian nodded politely. "Thank you." The worker hesitated before speaking again. "You know, some of us always wondered why you stayed so quiet." Adrian gave a tired smile. "Quiet people usually get left alone." The man looked sad hearing that. Before he could answer, another employee walked over quickly. "Mr. Sinclair is waiting for you upstairs." Adrian's stomach tightened instantly. Part of him suddenly worried he might lose his job after all. Maybe the performance embarrassed the hotel. Maybe wealthy guests complained. Maybe Victor Sinclair only wanted to warn him not to attract attention again. Adrian quietly followed the employee toward the private elevators while nervous thoughts filled his head. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. When the doors finally opened, Adrian stepped into the top executive floor of the hotel. Everything there looked expensive and silent. Soft lights glowed along the walls while city lights shined through giant glass windows overlooking downtown. The employee stopped outside a large office door. "He's inside." Adrian nodded slowly before knocking once. "Come in." Victor Sinclair sat behind a dark wooden desk reviewing papers when Adrian entered. Unlike the noisy ballroom downstairs, the office felt calm and private. Victor looked up immediately. "Sit down." Adrian sat carefully across from him. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then Victor leaned back slightly in his chair. "How long have you been playing piano seriously?" Adrian looked down at his hands. "Since I was a kid." "Did you ever take professional lessons?" "Not really." Victor frowned slightly. "Not really," Adrian explained quietly. "There was an old church piano at one foster home. A caretaker taught me a few basics when I was young. After that, I mostly learned by listening and practicing whenever I could." Victor stared at him in disbelief. "You taught yourself all of that?" Adrian gave a small shrug. "I guess." Victor remained silent for a moment. The more Adrian spoke, the more impossible the situation seemed. Years of natural talent hidden behind hotel uniforms and serving trays. Finally, Victor asked, "Why aren't you studying music professionally?" The question hit harder than Adrian expected. Because deep down, that dream never truly disappeared. Life had simply buried it under survival. Adrian took a slow breath before answering. "Music schools cost money. Rent costs money too. I had to work." Victor nodded slowly, understanding more than Adrian realized. Years ago, before building his hotel empire, Victor himself had grown up poor. His widowed mother cleaned restaurants during the day and played piano at small bars during the evenings to support them. Back then, Victor promised himself he would become successful enough to escape that life forever. And he did. But somewhere along the way, he forgot what struggle looked like. Tonight reminded him. Victor folded his hands together calmly. "The performance tonight," he said, "was one of the most emotional things I've heard in years." Adrian looked uncomfortable hearing praise again. "I was just playing." "No," Victor replied quietly. "You were telling your story." The room became silent. Adrian didn't know how to answer that because deep inside, he knew it was true. Every difficult memory had somehow poured into the piano without him planning it. Victor reached for a tablet on his desk and turned the screen toward Adrian. "You should probably see this." Adrian's eyes widened immediately. Videos of his performance had exploded online. Millions of views already. Thousands of comments appearing every minute. "Rich girl mocks waiter. Instantly regrets it. Hidden piano genius shocks luxury gala. This man deserves a real chance." Some comments praised Adrian's talent. Others criticized Celeste harshly for humiliating him publicly. Adrian's chest tightened uncomfortably. He never wanted internet attention. Victor noticed his expression. "You don't like this." Adrian shook his head quietly. "I don't want people attacking anyone because of me." Victor studied him carefully again. Even after being publicly embarrassed, Adrian still wasn't bitter. That impressed him even more. Before Victor could speak again, the office door suddenly opened. Celeste walked inside. Her confident attitude from earlier was gone. She looked tense and uncomfortable instead. "Dad, can I talk to you for a second?" Victor glanced at her calmly. "You can talk here." Celeste clearly didn't like that answer, but she stepped farther into the office anyway. For several awkward seconds, nobody spoke. Then Celeste looked directly at Adrian for the first time since the performance ended. "I didn't know," she said quietly. Adrian frowned slightly. "Know what?" "That you—" She paused awkwardly. "That you were actually talented." The sentence sounded wrong the moment it left her mouth. Victor noticed it too, but Adrian simply gave a small nod. "That's okay." "No, it's not," Celeste admitted softly. The honesty surprised both men. Celeste looked down briefly before continuing. "I was trying to embarrass you tonight." Adrian stayed silent. "And now millions of people think I'm a terrible person." Victor's expression hardened slightly. "Maybe because you acted like one." Celeste looked embarrassed hearing that from her own father. But deep down, she already knew he was right. The office became quiet again. Finally, Victor spoke. "Leave us for a minute." Celeste looked like she wanted to argue but stopped herself. Before leaving, she glanced once more at Adrian. "I really am sorry," she said quietly before walking out. The door closed behind her. Adrian stared at the floor for a moment. "She didn't mean for things to get this big," he said softly. Victor almost laughed at that. Even now, Adrian was defending the person who humiliated him. "You're kinder than most people would be," Victor said. Adrian didn't answer, because kindness wasn't really the reason. He simply understood what it felt like to be judged. Victor stood and slowly walked toward the giant office windows overlooking the city lights. Then he said something unexpected. "I want to help you." Adrian looked confused. "Help me?" "With music." Adrian blinked in disbelief. Victor turned back toward him. "You belong on stages, not carrying trays through ballrooms." Adrian immediately shook his head. "I appreciate it, sir, but I can't afford music schools or private lessons." "You won't have to." The room fell silent again. Victor continued calmly. "I have connections with one of the best music academies in the country. If you're willing, I can arrange an audition." Adrian stared at him speechless. This kind of opportunity only happened in movies, not real life. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes if music still matters to you." The answer came instantly inside Adrian's heart. Of course music mattered. It was the only thing that ever made him feel truly alive. But fear quickly followed behind the hope. "What if I'm not good enough?" he asked quietly. Victor smiled faintly. "You already proved tonight that you are." Adrian looked away, overwhelmed. For years he buried the dream of becoming a musician because surviving felt more important. He convinced himself that dreams belonged to people born with money and support. Now suddenly someone was offering him a chance he stopped believing could exist. Victor returned to his desk and handed Adrian a business card. "Think about it tonight," he said. "No pressure." Adrian carefully took the card. "Thank you." As Adrian stood to leave, Victor spoke again. "One more thing." Adrian turned back. "Don't let one cruel moment decide your value," Victor said quietly. "Most people only see uniforms and status. Very few actually see human beings." The words stayed with Adrian as he left the office. Outside, the hotel hallways were almost empty now. But downstairs, videos of his performance continued spreading across the internet faster every minute. And without realizing it yet, Adrian's life had already begun changing forever. The next morning, Adrian woke up to non-stop buzzing from his old phone. At first, he thought it was his alarm malfunctioning. But when he reached over and checked the screen, his eyes widened in confusion. Hundreds of notifications, missed calls, messages from unknown numbers, social media alerts from accounts he barely even used. Still half asleep, Adrian slowly sat up on the small couch inside his apartment. The place was tiny and worn down, with peeling paint near the kitchen ceiling and a heater that barely worked. A single lamp stood beside the window, and stacks of music notebooks sat piled beside an old keyboard in the corner. The apartment wasn't much, but it was the only place that truly felt his. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from one of the hotel workers. "Turn on the TV now." Confused, Adrian grabbed the remote and switched on the small television across the room. The moment the screen lit up, he nearly dropped the remote. His face was everywhere. News channels replayed clips of the piano performance from the gala. Headlines flashed across the screen. Waiter's surprise piano performance stuns wealthy crowd. Mystery musician goes viral overnight. Rich socialite faces backlash after mocking hotel worker. Adrian stared silently. The clip of Celeste saying, "If you can perform this piano, I'll adopt you myself," played again before the video showed the crowd becoming speechless during his performance. Millions of people had already watched it. One reporter spoke excitedly into the camera. "Viewers across the country are calling this one of the most emotional viral moments of the year." Adrian immediately muted the television. His chest felt tight. He didn't know whether to feel shocked, embarrassed, or terrified. A few hours ago, he was simply a waiter trying to survive another work week. Now strangers everywhere were talking about him online. His phone rang again. This time it was the hotel manager. Adrian hesitated before answering. "Hello, Adrian," the manager said quickly. "Please tell me you're okay." "I think so." The manager sighed heavily. "The hotel entrance is filled with reporters." Adrian nearly choked. "Reporters?" "Yes, they're asking about you nonstop." Adrian rubbed his forehead slowly. This was exactly what he feared. Tension, questions, people digging into his private life. The manager continued, "Mr. Sinclair wants you to stay home today until things calm down." Adrian nodded quietly even though the manager couldn't see him. "Okay. And Adrian? Yeah. You really were incredible last night." After the call ended, Adrian sat silently on the couch staring at the blank television screen. Everything felt unreal. For years he worked hard to stay invisible. Now the entire internet suddenly knew his face. Meanwhile, across town, things inside the Sinclair mansion were equally tense. Celeste sat at the kitchen island scrolling through endless social media comments attacking her online. She treated him like garbage. Money can't buy class. That poor guy handled the situation better than she did. The criticism hit harder than she expected. Usually online hate didn't bother her much. As an influencer, she was used to rude comments. But this time felt different because deep down she knew people weren't entirely wrong. Her behavior really had been cruel. Victor entered the kitchen quietly holding a cup of coffee. Celeste looked up nervously. "Dad, people are acting like I'm some horrible monster." Victor remained calm. "You publicly humiliated someone for entertainment," he replied. "What reaction were you expecting?" Celeste looked away. "I didn't think it would become this huge." "That's the problem," Victor said firmly. "You didn't think." The words stung because they were true. For years, Celeste had grown used to treating embarrassing moments like entertainment. Social media rewarded drama, attention, and viral clips. She stopped thinking about how those moments affected real people. But Adrian wasn't reacting with anger online. He wasn't giving interviews attacking her. He wasn't trying to embarrass her back. And somehow that made her feel even worse. Victor sat across from her. "Do you know what bothered me most last night?" Celeste stayed silent. "He defended you." Her eyes lifted slightly. Victor continued, "Even after what happened, he still tried protecting you from criticism." Celeste swallowed hard. That part haunted her too, because she knew most people would have enjoyed watching her get humiliated publicly after the way she treated him. But Adrian didn't. That kindness made her feel smaller than any online comment ever could. Back in his apartment, Adrian finally opened social media himself. The reaction shocked him even more. Millions of views, thousands of supportive messages. People from all over the world praised not only his talent but also the calm way he handled humiliation. Some comments came from musicians. Others came from people who simply related to feeling invisible. I worked as a cleaner for years. This video made me cry. Talent exists everywhere. People just don't look. This man deserves a real chance. Adrian read quietly for several minutes before putting the phone down. Part of him felt grateful, but another part felt uncomfortable. Because the internet only saw one moment. They didn't know the years behind it. The loneliness, the struggle, the nights he nearly gave up on music completely. A sudden knock at the apartment door interrupted his thoughts. Adrian froze immediately. Nobody visited him. Carefully, he walked toward the door and opened it slightly. To his surprise, Victor Sinclair stood outside. Behind him waited a black luxury car near the curb. Adrian blinked in confusion. "Sir." Victor gave a small nod. "Mind if I come in?" A few minutes later, Victor sat inside the tiny apartment looking around quietly. His eyes eventually stopped on the old keyboard in the corner. "You still practice here?" Adrian looked embarrassed suddenly. "It's not much." Victor walked closer to the keyboard. Several keys were cracked, and the speakers made a faint buzzing sound. Yet pages of handwritten music notes sat neatly stacked beside it. Victor picked one up carefully. "These are your arrangements?" Adrian nodded slowly. "You wrote all this yourself?" "Mostly at night after work." Victor looked genuinely impressed. The more he learned about Adrian, the clearer one thing became. This wasn't ordinary talent. This was someone who spent years quietly building skill without recognition, money, or opportunity. Victor placed the papers down gently. "I spoke with the academy this morning," he said. Adrian's heartbeat immediately quickened. "And they agreed to meet you." Adrian stared at him speechless. Victor smiled faintly. "You'll have a private audition in 3 days." For a moment, Adrian couldn't breathe properly. 3 days. His entire future suddenly felt terrifyingly close. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted quietly. Victor looked at him seriously. "Adrian, people spend their whole lives waiting for someone to believe in them. Don't run from this chance because of fear." Adrian looked down. Fear had controlled most of his life already. Fear of failure. Fear of rejection. Fear that dreaming too big would only lead to disappointment. Victor could almost see those thoughts happening inside his head. Then he said something unexpected. "When I was young, my mother used to play piano in restaurants for tips." Adrian looked surprised. Victor rarely spoke about his past publicly. "We were poor," Victor continued calmly. "Very poor. People ignored us constantly." He glanced toward the keyboard. "But my mother always said talent means nothing if fear keeps it hidden." The room fell quiet. Adrian slowly sat down near the keyboard. His fingers rested lightly on the worn keys. "You really think I belong there?" he asked softly. Victor answered immediately. "Yes." For the first time in years, Adrian allowed himself to imagine it. A real music academy. Professional training. A future connected to music instead of survival jobs. The dream felt dangerous because hope always carried the risk of pain. But somewhere deep inside, something small had already started growing again. Belief. As Victor prepared to leave, he paused near the apartment door. "One more thing," he said. Adrian looked up. "You don't owe the internet anything. Don't let attention change who you are." After Victor left, Adrian stood quietly by the window, watching the black car disappear down the street. Then he looked back toward the keyboard. Slowly, he sat down and began to play again. Not for cameras. Not for fame. Just for himself. But unknown to Adrian, someone else was already becoming obsessed with his sudden rise online. A man watching the viral videos from another city with growing anger in his eyes. Someone from Adrian's past. Someone who knew secrets Adrian hoped never to revisit again. 3 days passed faster than Adrian expected. Ever since the viral performance, his life no longer felt quiet. Reporters still waited outside the hotel almost every morning. Interview requests filled his inbox daily. Even strangers recognized him on the street now. But despite all the attention, Adrian tried focusing only on one thing: the audition. Every spare moment was spent practicing at the small keyboard inside his apartment or at the community center piano late at night. Sometimes he practiced until his fingers hurt, afraid that one mistake could destroy the opportunity standing in front of him. Because deep down, part of him still feared this entire situation could disappear at any moment. Like a dream ending too soon. On the morning of the audition, Adrian barely slept. Rain tapped softly against the apartment windows while he stood in front of the bathroom mirror adjusting the collar of his clean black shirt. It wasn't expensive, but he made sure it looked neat. For several seconds, he simply stared at himself silently. He still didn't fully recognize the person the world suddenly seemed interested in. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Victor had arrived personally to drive him to the academy. When Adrian stepped outside, he noticed something different immediately. Reporters were gathered near the street again. Cameras turned toward him the moment he appeared. "Adrian, over here. How are you feeling about the audition? Do you forgive Celeste Sinclair? Are you signing with a music label?" The sudden shouting made Adrian uncomfortable instantly. Victor quietly opened the car door. "Get in." Once inside the car, the outside noise disappeared. Adrian let out a slow breath. "I'm not made for this attention," he admitted quietly. Victor smiled faintly while driving. "Most people who deserve attention usually aren't." The city passed by outside the windows while silence filled the car for a while. Then Victor glanced toward him. "Nervous?" Adrian laughed softly under his breath. "Terrified. That's normal. What if they realize I'm not as good as people think?" Victor shook his head calmly. "Adrian, people online reacted emotionally because your music was real. That can't be faked." Adrian looked out the window again without answering. Part of him wanted to believe that, but years of rejection were difficult to erase overnight. When they finally arrived at the academy, Adrian's stomach tightened immediately. The building looked enormous. Tall marble pillars stood near the entrance while students carrying instruments walked through the halls confidently. Everything about the place felt elegant and intimidating. Adrian suddenly felt completely out of place. Victor noticed the change in his expression. "Listen to me carefully," he said before Adrian stepped out of the car. "You earned this opportunity. Don't walk in there feeling smaller than anyone else." Adrian nodded slowly. Inside the academy, the audition room felt surprisingly simple. A grand piano stood at the center beneath warm lights while 3 instructors quietly reviewed papers at a long table. One older instructor looked up first. "You're Adrian?" "Yes, sir." The instructor gave a polite nod. "We've heard quite a lot about you recently." Adrian felt nervous again hearing that. He didn't want them judging him based on internet fame. He wanted them to judge him honestly. The instructor gestured toward the piano. "Whenever you're ready." Adrian slowly walked toward the instrument. For one brief second, fear almost took over completely. What if the gala performance was just luck? What if the viral attention raised expectations too high? What if he failed? Then his fingers touched the piano keys. And suddenly, everything else disappeared. Adrian began to play. The first melody filled the room softly, emotional and calm. Within seconds, the instructors stopped writing notes and looked up fully. The music grew stronger. Every emotion Adrian carried inside himself flowed naturally into the performance. Struggle, loneliness, hope, resilience. He didn't play to impress them anymore. He simply played honestly. That honesty changed everything. One instructor quietly removed his glasses while listening closely. Another leaned forward slowly in disbelief. By the time Adrian reached the final part of the piece, the room felt completely still. Then the last note faded away. Silence. The instructors exchanged looks with each other before the oldest finally spoke. "How long did you say you studied professionally?" "I didn't." The instructor blinked slowly. "Incredible." Another instructor shook his head with amazement. "You play with technical flaws sometimes," he admitted honestly. "But your emotional connection to music is extraordinary. That's something many trained musicians spend years trying to develop." Adrian barely knew how to respond. For years, nobody in the music world had ever taken him seriously. Now respected professionals were praising him. The oldest instructor smiled warmly. "We would be honored to accept you into the academy." Adrian froze. For a second, he honestly thought he heard wrong. You mean, I got in? You absolutely got in. Emotion hit him so suddenly that he struggled to speak. Years of buried dreams crashed into one overwhelming moment. Outside the audition room, Victor stood waiting in the hallway. The second Adrian walked out, Victor understood immediately from the look on his face. You made it. Adrian laughed softly, almost in disbelief himself. I made it. Victor smiled proudly. For the first time in years, Adrian truly felt like his life might finally be changing. But that peace didn't last long. Later that evening, Adrian returned home exhausted but happier than he'd felt in years. He placed the academy acceptance papers carefully on the kitchen table before finally checking his phone again. Hundreds of notifications appeared instantly. Most were supportive messages. But one new message stopped him cold. We need to talk. No name attached. Only a phone number. At first Adrian ignored it. Then another message arrived seconds later. Don't pretend you forgot me. A cold feeling spread through his chest. Because suddenly he recognized the number. Years ago, while living in one of the foster facilities, there had been a staff supervisor named Raymond. Adrian remembered him clearly. Cold voice. Sharp eyes. Always pretending to help children publicly while treating them differently behind closed doors. Raymond often controlled donation money and threatened kids who questioned him. Adrian avoided him whenever possible growing up. And now somehow Raymond had found him again. Another message appeared. Funny how the internet suddenly cares about you now. Adrian stared silently at the screen. His hands tightened slightly. Then came the third message. You should remember who helped you survive back then. Adrian immediately knew what this was. Manipulation. Raymond always acted like vulnerable people owed him something. The phone buzzed again. Call me before I start talking to reporters. Adrian's stomach dropped. He sat down slowly on the couch, staring at the messages. This was the part of fame nobody talked about. The past returning. People trying to use attention for themselves. For several minutes, Adrian sat in silence before finally calling Victor. Victor answered quickly. How did it go? I got in, Adrian said quietly. Victor smiled through the phone. I knew you would. But then he noticed Adrian's voice change. What's wrong? Adrian hesitated before explaining the messages. The longer Victor listened, the more serious his expression became. When Adrian finished, Victor spoke calmly. Do not respond to him. You don't understand, Adrian said quietly. People like Raymond know how to twist stories. Then let lawyers handle it. Adrian rubbed his forehead tiredly. I just want a normal life. Victor's voice softened slightly. Adrian, when someone rises suddenly, certain people appear hoping to benefit from it. That says more about them than you. The room became quiet again. Then Victor added something important. You survived difficult people long before internet fame. Don't let fear drag you backward now. After the call ended, Adrian walked slowly toward the keyboard in the corner of his apartment. He sat down quietly and rested his fingers on the keys. Music had always been the only place where his mind felt clear. As he began playing softly, the stress inside him slowly eased. But somewhere else in the city, Raymond watched another news segment about Adrian's growing fame with a dangerous smile, because he wasn't planning to disappear quietly. And Adrian had no idea how much trouble was about to enter his new life. The next 2 weeks became the most stressful period Adrian had faced in years. During the daytime, he attended classes at the music academy, trying to focus on technique, timing, and advanced performances. At night, he dealt with non-stop messages from reporters, online attention, and growing anxiety about Raymond. The messages never fully stopped. Sometimes Raymond acted friendly. Other times he sounded threatening. You wouldn't have survived those foster homes without me. People should know the full truth about your past. You owe me respect after everything I did for you. Every message made Adrian more uncomfortable, because he knew exactly what Raymond was doing. Manipulation. The same thing he used for years around vulnerable children. One evening after class, Adrian finally showed the messages to Victor in person. Victor read through them silently inside his office before placing the phone down carefully. "This man is dangerous," Victor said calmly. Adrian nodded slightly. "He knows how to make people doubt themselves." Victor looked directly at him. "Did he ever physically hurt you?" Adrian shook his head immediately. "No. But he controlled everything in that facility. Donations, punishments, schedules. Kids were scared of him." Victor leaned back thoughtfully. "Then maybe it's time people finally looked into him properly." Adrian frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Victor opened a folder on his desk. "After you first told me about him, I asked my legal team to investigate quietly." Adrian looked surprised. Victor continued calmly. "And what they found is concerning." Inside the folder were records connected to missing donation funds from several foster programs Raymond supervised years ago. Nothing fully proven yet, but enough suspicious activity to raise serious questions. Adrian stared silently. "You think he stole money?" Victor nodded slowly. "It appears possible." For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. Then he looked down quietly. "There were always rumors among the kids." Victor closed the folder. "If Raymond contacts you again, don't answer alone." Adrian agreed, but deep down he still felt uneasy. He hated conflict. He hated attention. And most of all, he hated revisiting painful memories he spent years trying to escape. Meanwhile, online attention around Adrian continued growing. Music clips from his academy practice sessions began spreading across social media. Students secretly recorded him performing emotional piano pieces during late-night rehearsals, and millions of viewers connected deeply with his music. People admired not only his talent but also his story. The poor waiter nobody noticed. The quiet foster kid who kept practicing even when life gave him no reason to believe success was possible. But while Adrian's popularity grew, Celeste's life had changed too. For the first time in years, she stopped posting luxury content online. Instead of chasing attention, she quietly started helping with charity projects connected to foster children and music programs. At first, people assumed it was only a public image fix after the viral backlash. But Victor noticed the truth. His daughter was genuinely changing. One afternoon, Celeste visited the academy carrying coffee, while Adrian practiced alone inside one of the music rooms. When she entered quietly, Adrian stopped playing immediately. "You don't have to stop," she said softly. Adrian smiled faintly. "I needed a break anyway." Celeste handed him a coffee carefully. For a few seconds, the room stayed quiet. Then she finally spoke. "I saw the videos from your classes." Adrian looked embarrassed already. "People record everything now. They record because your music makes people feel something." Adrian didn't answer. Compliments still made him uncomfortable. Celeste leaned against the piano thoughtfully. "You know, before all this happened, I honestly thought successful people were just born different." Adrian looked at her curiously. She gave a small laugh at herself. "I grew up around money my whole life. Private schools, luxury trips, famous people. I never really understood how hard normal people fight just to survive." Her voice sounded honest now. Not fake. Not dramatic. Real. Then she looked directly at him. "You changed that." Adrian stayed quiet for a moment before speaking softly. "No. You changed it yourself." The words hit her harder than expected. Because he was right. People can inspire change, but they still have to choose it themselves. Before either could say more, Adrian's phone suddenly buzzed again. His expression immediately tightened after seeing the screen. "Raymond." Celeste noticed instantly. "He's still bothering you?" Adrian nodded. This time the message was different. "Meet me tonight if you want this situation handled privately." Celeste frowned immediately. "That sounds bad." "It probably is." She looked serious now. "You're not going alone." A few hours later, Adrian sat inside a quiet cafe downtown with Victor's lawyer seated nearby at another table unnoticed. Raymond arrived exactly on time. The moment Adrian saw him again after all these years, old memories rushed back instantly. Raymond looked older now, but the cold smile remained exactly the same. "Well," Raymond said while sitting down casually, "look at you. famous musician now. Adrian stayed calm. What do you want? Raymond leaned back comfortably. Respect would be nice after everything I did for you. You didn't help me? Adrian replied quietly. Raymond's smile faded slightly. You kids always remembered things dramatically. Adrian said nothing, because arguing with people like Raymond never worked. Raymond lowered his voice. Listen carefully. Reporters would love stories about your foster years. Imagine the headlines if I start talking. Adrian's chest tightened slightly, but he stayed calm. What stories? Raymond smirked. Whatever people believe. There it was. The real threat. Lies. Manipulation. Fear. But before Raymond could continue, Victor's lawyer calmly walked over and placed a folder onto the table. Raymond's expression changed immediately. What's this? The lawyer spoke professionally. Evidence connected to missing charity funds during your management years. Raymond froze. The lawyer continued calmly. We also have witness statements from former employees, prepared to cooperate if necessary. For the first time that evening, Raymond looked nervous. Adrian watched silently. Years ago, this man controlled frightened children through fear and power. Now suddenly, that control was disappearing. Raymond stood abruptly. You think anyone's going to believe him over me? The lawyer answered calmly. We believe financial records. Raymond stared at Adrian for several long seconds before finally leaving the cafe without another word. Once he disappeared outside, Adrian let out a slow breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The lawyer gave a small nod. I don't think he'll contact you again. And he didn't. Over the following weeks, official investigations quietly began looking into several old foster program finances connected to Raymond. News outlets eventually reported the story, but Adrian refused to participate publicly. He didn't want revenge. He simply wanted peace. Months passed. Life slowly became calmer. Adrian continued studying at the academy and improving rapidly. Professional musicians started noticing him seriously now. Invitations for performances arrived from theaters, charity events, and television programs. But the biggest moment came nearly 1 year after the viral gala performance. The Sinclair Foundation announced a major charity concert supporting music education for foster children, and Adrian would headline the event. Ironically, the concert would take place in the exact same ballroom where everything first began. The night of the concert, the Grand Meridian Hotel looked even more crowded than before. Reporters lined the entrance while guests filled every table inside the ballroom. But this time, nobody ignored Adrian when he entered. People stood immediately, applauding as he walked toward the stage. Victor watched proudly near the front row. Celeste stood backstage quietly smiling. And Adrian simply looked around the ballroom in disbelief. 1 year earlier, he stood in the same room carrying drinks while people laughed at him. Now they came to hear him perform. Life really could change unexpectedly. As Adrian sat down at the grand piano, complete silence filled the ballroom. He rested his fingers gently on the keys. Then he began to play. The music felt deeper now than ever before. Every note carried pieces of his journey. The loneliness of foster homes, the years of being invisible, the humiliation, the fear, the hope, and finally the belief that he deserved a chance too. Several guests became emotional almost immediately. Some quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Others simply sat frozen, completely lost in the performance. Near the end of the song, Adrian glanced briefly toward Celeste backstage. She smiled softly through watery eyes. Neither of them needed words anymore. Both understood how much that one cruel moment had changed their lives forever. Then Adrian played the final note. The ballroom exploded into applause. People stood cheering loudly while cameras flashed across the room. But Adrian barely noticed any of it. Because for the first time in his life, he no longer felt invisible. And maybe that was the greatest gift music had ever given him.